Welcome to our capstone coffee conversation. Today is Tuesday, March 14th. And today we are joined by a very special guest, Laura Moynihan of Digital Helpmates. Laura, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We have a lot of clients that I think could benefit from some of Laura's thoughts. Laura and I are part of a professional networking group that we connected through. And I learned a little bit about her business, Digital Helpmates, helping you enjoy your devices again since 2015. And then my immediate thought was there's a lot of clients who could benefit from learning a little bit more about cybersecurity, some tips and tricks, and some things to be aware of. So before we jump into our material today, Laura, why don't we start with a little bit about you and how you got started with Digital Helpmates and why you started it?
Sure. Well, I have a varied background in teaching. I was a high school teacher. I was a graphic designer in the advertising agency for 10 years or so. And then I took what I call a 10-year maternity leave. And when it was time to come back, I thought, well, what do I want to do now? And I really enjoyed being in business for myself. And I thought, well, I'm just going to combine these two professions of mine and help people with their technology, because it was something that I was being asked to do more and more by my parents, by friends that were my parents' age, all sorts of people. So I thought, well, maybe this has legs. And here we are 8 years later, still doing it.
Yeah, so far, almost 10 years in. Congratulations. That's great.
Thank you.
Well, let's dive in. We're going to start pretty broad with some general cybersecurity information and then narrow down to some practical tips and tricks that pretty much anyone can benefit from. So why don't we start wide? What are some general cybersecurity tips and what are some common fraud attempts to look for?
Yeah, so, I see people posting a lot about watch out for this fraud, watch out for that fraud, especially when you're on someplace like Nextdoor or Facebook. And that's great. It's great that people are letting people know about the frauds that are out there. And I encourage people to talk more and more about it. The only downside of that is that these cyber criminals are extremely creative. And they're going to come up with new scams every single day. So there's no way that you can possibly stay on top of what the recent scams are. Some of the ones that I have learned are like hot for 2023 are like, for instance, fake job scams. They pretend that they're giving you a lucrative job offer and then they ask for some sort of upfront cost, or maybe they're just wanting your data, your social security number, that kind of thing. There's all sorts of phone scams those have been going around for years. People pretending that they're everyone from, the police to the FBI to the IRS. So that people can scam you over email, over phone, over text. But the most important thing, I think, instead of trying to keep up on what all the scams are, is figuring out what they have in common and what to listen for so that you can identify when one of these things is a scam, regardless of the content of it. So most times when things come through email, there's like 3 really great kind of tells that I always look for. And this is something my clients do. They'll send me an email and they'll say, is this real or is this fake? So the first thing I do is I look at, do they call the person customer? Or do they say dear customer or dear, and then whatever's in front of the @ symbol in your email name, right? They don't know your first name. Okay, that's number 1 tell. Number 2 is, so first it's, who they're addressing. Next, it's who is that's sending the email? And the way that you can tell is looking at their email address. And if their email address looks confusing or funky, or like it doesn't match exactly what the company is that they say they're coming from, that's a huge tell right there. In fact, that's usually the first thing I look at. That'll eliminate like 90% of them. And then the last one is scour the email for any kind of punctuation errors, any kind of spelling errors, anything that just seems off. Like one time I saw, they said this is coming from, PayPal, Silicon Valley, California. There's no town called Silicon Valley, California, right? But someone from India isn't going to know that. And I promise you that if you're getting an email from eBay, from Amazon, from Apple, they have really good spell checkers out there, really good editors. They're not going to let any sort of grammatical errors go out to these, thousands of people that are getting these emails. So if you see any one of those things on an email you receive, it's pretty likely that it is just a scam and you can ignore it, send it to junk.
Gotcha. Just a quick pause for a second. Moisha, are we doing okay on audio? Folks can hear us a little bit. Okay. That's so just to summarize some of that, look for misspellings, look for suspicious phrasing of different greetings and calling you customer and things like that. Looking out for some of those common telltale signs that show that they're probably not an official representative of this company. I remember one time I got an email from Apple at iTunes.com for an Amazon return.
Oh, interesting.
And I thought, something is not right here.
Exactly, just like be skeptical, like trust that spidey sense. If you're getting something from Amazon that says you bought an expensive laptop and they don't put your address on there, the shipping address, they know your shipping address, right? So that's a telltale sign. And then, when it comes to passwords, and staying safe with passwords, now that is definitely the low-hanging fruit, is passwords are just consistently weak. So of course you want to pick secure and unique passwords for every single website. And also you want to, if it's an option, choose that multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication for logging into, especially the important websites, things that have your financial data. That just means that they have to verify that you're you through some other means, whether it's text, email, even a phone call. That's actually the best way to stay secure.
Yes, I've always heard it's passwords or ways to authenticate yourself can be something you have, like a key to your house, something you are, so like facial recognition or fingerprint, or something that you know. And unfortunately, something that a password is probably the easiest way for websites and things like that. But if you can have something that you have as well, like a text code, that's going to make a big difference too. I think we have a couple common passwords. This is from 2019. Moisha, why don't you go ahead and pull this up? Pretty entertaining to see some of the top passwords of the last couple of years that we have here. Password, of course, classic. I love you. That was a crack up one too. Welcome. Come on in. Here's my password. Right? Dragon, freedom.
How about let me in?
Let me in. Monkey, Jesus, football. It's great. We can see these are definitely American passwords, right? This is great.
The most common ones in the United States. So can you guess what the most common password is used worldwide today? And it's been the same for years and years.
Probably password 123 or something like that.
It is 1 2 3 4 5 6.
Even worse. There we go.
That is the most common password. So any of these passwords that you see here on this list are hackable within seconds. Wow. A brute force hack, which means it's trying, every word in the dictionary. That's the first one they're going to go for, and then every combination of letters and numbers. If it's under 6 characters or a common word like this, just one word, like 5 6 seconds, no time at all to hack that password.
So you are a big fan, because of that, you're a big fan of password managers. So for those of us who don't know what those are, tell us a little bit about password managers and how they work.
Yeah, so password managers are a little bit of software that sometimes is free and bundled with a web browser, but other times you pay for separately. And it basically helps you keep track of all of your existing passwords. So that's usually the first problem I see with clients, is that they have all these passwords and they cannot keep track of them. So they're constantly having to do password resets. So just having something that can keep track of what your passwords are is super helpful. It can also fill your passwords for you when you're using a web browser, which is most times where we are when we're putting in passwords. And it can also generate safe passwords for you. And that's really important, because the number one error that I see people do with passwords is repeated passwords.
Yes.
Even if it's a portion of that password that's repeated and they put it in a different place. I was guilty of this. I used to do this, 10 plus years ago.
I think we all are.
Yeah. And I used to think that was safe. What I've learned since then is that it's not safe, because if they even guess a portion of the password, the rest of it, they can just brute force hack. So it makes it much quicker to hack a password if they're like, oh, that dog name, that football team, that, the name of your sibling or your daughter, it's very easy to get those using a little bit of malware called a keystroke logger. So the only way to have all of those things together, having a unique password for every website, having a complex password, in other words, upper, lower, numbers, symbols, all of that.
Right.
And having a long password, which means like 12 characters plus. The only way to do that is by using a password manager. None of us are brilliant enough to remember all of those different passwords. And that's really why people use repeated passwords, is because they're relying on their memory. Right? Once you stop relying on your memory, then you're able to actually be safe with your passwords.
Yeah. That's really good, interesting stuff, really helpful stuff. The last topic that I found very interesting when I was looking at some of your material was the concept of a digital estate or a digital lockbox. So you talked about how you can actually use your password manager to help manage some of your important documents. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. So not all password managers are created equal. I should say that, because it's not really possible to create a digital lockbox with any old password manager. I'll give you some different examples. So some of the password managers that are free that I see people use a lot are like the Google, it comes in Chrome, the Chrome browser password manager. There's one in Firefox. There's also one in Safari that is built into all the Mac computers called Keychain. And those are better than not using any at all, but they lack the features to allow you to store anything other than just passwords. And I find that also they don't do a really fantastic job of managing duplicates, and it just ends up being, from my point of view, kind of not really a great solution. So a better solution for a better password manager than those is something like 1Password. That's actually the software that we're currently recommending the most right now. There's also Dashlane is a popular one, and then there's a free one called Bitwarden that some people use. It's a little less user friendly, but still, all of those are very good password managers. And I know for sure that in 1Password, you can store all sorts of different things other than just passwords. You can store, your credit cards, you can store your social security numbers, your even birth certificates, scans of things, your computer and your phone unlock codes, which are incredibly important if something were to happen to you to get into that device.
Yeah, in fact, let's pull up that list if we haven't already up there. So it's just good to kind of write a few of these down. And I thought it was interesting. There are some things that do go in here that maybe we don't touch as often, some things that we do touch more often that maybe don't need to be in there, right? But the one I thought was interesting too is audio files, voicemails, maybe important messages from folks. You can actually store all kinds of different things in here. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. If you have, that last voicemail from a loved one that you just never want to lose, you could store that in a password manager. And even if you hardly ever access these, the value of keeping them in this digital lockbox is that if something were to happen to your home, for instance, let's say your home burns down or you end up having to evacuate, all of this is saved in the cloud and you have access to it every time you have a phone or a computer and an internet connection. So that's probably, in fact, actually, I've been teaching a course called Digital Disaster Planning, really kind of around that idea of be prepared for the unknown by using a password manager in this way. But the other great thing about it is that you can also designate certain people, trusted people in your life that can access this lockbox. And you can set that up in your will or your trust documents and just make sure, you kind of sit down with your family and you work this out ahead of time. Okay, if something were to happen to me, here's how you get into my lockbox. And I think it is important that it's this live thing. It's this lockbox that it's not a printed out, spreadsheet or something like that, because not only is a spreadsheet insecure, but passwords are a living, changing thing.
Right.
You change them all the time and you should change them all the time. So you need to have something that as you change the passwords, that it also is going to sync up, and those updated passwords are the ones that get passed on to your loved ones.
That's really good advice. I hear all the time from clients when they have a parent pass away, they always say, I just don't want my kids to go through what I went through in sorting out all this mess. And more often what they mean is just getting access to everything, not necessarily that they didn't have a will or they didn't have a trust set up or it was confusing. Usually the attorneys do a pretty good job of that. It's usually just getting that information in an easy way.
Right.
And you mentioned having someone that you trust be able to access that. Ideally, in my opinion, that would be your executor, your personal representative, but sometimes that person may not be kind of skilled in this area and they may need a second person to help them with that. So all things to consider. as you're setting this up?
Yeah, just as you would consider who the right person is to care for your minor children if something were to happen to you, you might want to also consider who's the best person in my life that could handle my digital lockbox. Even if they're not the executor of my estate, could they pass along the information to the executor? Could they get it in a format? Because that person might not be tech savvy enough to do it themselves without a lot of help.
Right, right. Really good information. Thank you, Laura, for your time today. I think we're going to go to the questions. Moisha, do we have any questions in the chat?
What are some things we could do if we actually are hacked?
Very good question.
Yeah, so you know, we as a company, we offer a service called tech tutoring, where we can help you set up, you know, your digital lockbox. But another thing that we often get clients coming to us for tech tutoring is when they've been hacked, so to speak. And they may not have been hacked. You know, it's like the definition of hacking is usually like someone has installed something on your computer, like a virus that you don't want, or, you know, hacked into the back end of your system and gotten information. Sometimes it's not that. Sometimes it's just someone conned you over the phone and got you to buy a bunch of iTunes gift cards and given the codes. That's a very common hack, and it's nothing was installed on your system. So, you know, the most important thing is if something like that happens and it has involved your computer, then reach out to a computer professional, like one of us at Digital Helpmates or somewhere else, and try to make sure that anything that was installed on your computer has been completely wiped off, because you may not even know, you might not even see the things that have been installed. They might be in the back end and invisible. And then, of course, the second thing is reach out to your financial professionals, you know, like Brian, your bank, your credit cards, and start the process there of recovering your information and hopefully your money. It's not always possible, especially in the case where you buy gift cards. It is not possible, unfortunately, to get that money back. But, you know, the sad part about this, and we kind of just refer to it as identity theft overall. The sad part about identity theft is that it takes an average of 6 months and 200 hours of work to overcome having your identity hacked or breached. And so really prevention is the key here, you know.
Right. Yes, that makes all the difference, which is why that's what we spend most of our time on today.
Yeah.
Next question, Moisha.
How do you know when you've been hacked when it's not obvious?
That's a good question.
Yeah. Well, these days, malware is actually much more prevalent than viruses are. And the difference is just, you know, a virus is much more harmful. It's sometimes in the back end of your system, replicating itself. Malware is just kind of, it could even be a benign little bit of software, or even just something that, you know, somebody taking control of your Chrome notifications and shoving a bunch of notifications up there that you don't want to get. That is actually malware. So sometimes you'll know because of that. You'll see all sorts of notifications that you're like, wait a minute, why are all these websites that I don't want to go shop at, you know, showing you notifications? You might see all of a sudden suspicious calendar appointments pop up in your calendar. You could even see, this is a really common one, a window popping up and it like a siren goes off, something really loud, and it says your computer's infected, you have to call this number. So anytime you see something like that, and it's they try to scare you, they try to scare you into immediate action, that's something that you should be skeptical of. And you know, when in doubt, just turn off your computer, reach out to someone, whether it's a computer professional or even just a trusted friend or your IT savvy nephew or whoever, and say, hey, what do you think happened here, before you take any action, especially calling a number or clicking on a link that's in that very message.
Yes. Good advice. Good advice. Moisha, do we have any others on? Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us. As always, reach out to your financial advisor for more information and to discuss more about how we can help with this. Thank you all, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
Thank you, Laura.